Good evening. Revolutionary greetings and salutations to all progressive and democratic forces through the length and breadth of Africa, and also those in the diaspora. The 25th of May, in the year of our Lord 2022, marked the 59th anniversary of the birth of OAU, which is the Organization of African Unity. But I wouldn't want to dwell much and overburden you with rigorous volumes of history. But I would like to take this time to pose questions on where are we today and what have we done to realize the goals of the signing of that landmark charter of 1963. Kwame Nkrumah and the founding fathers of OAU wanted Africans to live in unquestionable dignity and for all Africans to obtain human security and finally to make Africa a united front. Yet today, the black person all over the world, and sometimes indifferently called the man of color, still remains stuck and glued at the bottom of the ontological ladder. Present day Africa reads like a script of post or pre-modern Europe in terms of disintegration, wars, and lack of social cohesion. How can we be united as a continent? How can we be united at a continental scale? Yet we cannot live with one another on a community level and divided along tribal lines. Do we have an African problem? And if we do, what is the African problem? The discourse that I would like to embark on this evening is greatly informed by authorities that I've read, namely Sabelo Kacheni Ndlovu, Mahmoud Mamdani, Professor Benera, Franz Fanon, Amilcar Cabral, and Walter Rodley, just to mention just a few. They all agree that Africa suffers from a malaise of lack of epistemic freedom, or what they term epistemic independence. We suffer from that inability to think from where we are and to think within the spectrum of our own terms and context. The cardinal point is that Africans, or as Africans, we think from Euro-global North perspectives and contexts, which are totally divorced and devoid of the African heartbeat. Africa today, or the day Africa Day, should be a remembrance of that day on that day of 20th May 1963, when 32 African heads of state signed the Charter of the Organization of African Unity. Now it has cosmetically evolved to what is known as the African Union, which is just a pale shadow of the former. The African Union is one of the greatest disappointments and one of the drawbacks that Africa is facing. And it is currently housed, or their offices are a donation from the People's Republic of China. Then how honestly can they be accountable to the African continent when they still are operating from rented spaces within the African continent. In the days in memorial, this day was marked by celebration of the fight against colonialism, as many countries shook off the shackles of bondage from the rule of imperialist powers. It is unfortunate today that we as a continent struggle to fully commemorate this day. It just passes, and very few people remember it, or it's marked on their calendars. It has now been relegated to be a footnote, which I believe eventually it shall be demoted and it will disappear from our history and our memories forever. Relegated to the dustbins of history. It is now a day of sadness, and I think as a continent, we should sit down, not sit back and aggressively reflect on what we have missed as a continent and critically examine our position in the worldscape of things. How much have we veered off the tangent of the goal of the OAU since 1963? Maybe first we need to grapple with the issue of decolonization. Secondly, the union of the people of Africa. And thirdly, we need to have peace and stability throughout the continent. We are living in an era where these goals are slowly but surely drowning in a pool of recession. And maybe this could be attributed to a few factors. Firstly, without a shadow of doubt, is that the effects of colonization, long since it was dismantled, the effects are still weighing heavily on us. As I see it, colonization manifests maybe in a threefold. Firstly, it had a political and economic dimension, which we have managed to dismantle that by attaining autonomy through gaining independence from the European capitals. And therefore, we are now self-governing entities. But maybe it's just a name. But there is one issue that still lingers on. The issue of coloniality still hangs above our head like the sword of Damocles. They are really serious, it is really a serious colonial existence and very grave colonial manifestations that still linger on years after colonization was dismantled by gaining of independence by African states. But it seems we've just gained political power and nothing else. We have gained the power to rename streets and towns. But actually, in terms of development, I don't think we have done much. And there's this term that says colonization is not over, but colonization is all over. Kwame Nkrumah posited the dictum that says, seek ye the political kingdom or the political empire, and all other things will follow. But this has not happened. We are still yet to witness the other factors that we're supposed to follow with the fall of colonial rule. Another issue is that our education is still entrapped and captured. Our schools and universities, no matter how many we have had since independence, they still do not resemble the African communities in which they are located in. They have nothing whatsoever that you can liken them to the peoples that these universities and schools are supposed to serve. Education should be one of the tools that we are using to solve all our societal problems. Though most of the problems may not be academic, but universities should be centers for problem solving within the community. Also, we have got a high number of universities, but also a very high number of unemployed university and college graduates. And also, in that same breath, we also want to cry that Africa is facing a critical shortage of of specialized skills. So, how then can it be possible that we are producing graduates every year in their thousands, but still we are having critical shortages of skills? This can only boil down to say that the education or the schooling that we are getting does not align itself with the needs of the 21st century. Thirdly, again, though gaining political independence and self governing autonomy, the systems that run the economic and power dynamics are still in the hands of the violent capitalistic appendages. The colonial power matrix still continues to haunt Africa many after the death of colonization and apartheid. This analysis does not exonerate African leaders and Africans for not objecting on their agency. If you are to look at it prima facie, Africa is blessed in all facets of development, from human capital, natural and mineral resources. What we lack unapologetically is morally and ethically correct leadership. Without any stretch of imagination, the Inca Dam, as an example, in the DRC, if it is appropriately managed, can generate enough electrical power for Africa's consumption. But we are all, as a continent, in darkness. Also, the general electorate, the African electorate, finds itself in limbo, especially with the inherited institutions that we have viewed as the lens that this is a democratic society. Especially with elections, they have generated a lot of contestations in the African context. Contestations like gender quotas, party membership, and factional politics, such that the voting event is producing leaders who do not resonate with the common African people. These elections are producing in mass leaders who do not feel what the people feel, leaders whose status does not qualify them to use our general hospitals, leaders whose domicilius is not in their elected constituencies, leaders whose children attend elite schools, whether be it locally and internationally as well. Yes, and I like to this point. Do not take me wrong. I am not fighting people with money, not at all. I am fighting the gross abuse of power and Africa's natural resources. Because we have leaders who unashamedly drag Africa to the global dinner table to be devoured as soup, as a starter soup on a world scale. These elections have worked to the disadvantage of Africa in more ways than one. Thus, we cannot say that the general mass of Africa are complicit in the endorsement of corrupt leadership. It is abundantly and evidently clear that there is a wholesome allied collusion through the species of elements in the army, in the judiciary, the church, and the corporate world. We have formed an unholy trinity that gerrymanders the electoral process, such that the outcomes of elections on the African continent are actually predetermined. The winners are known way before the elections are actually done. So there is this overarching influence, and that overarching background is grounded in the capitalist scheme, which will at all costs protect, by all means, degenerate incumbents and uphold the status quo. The status quo where the common African masses will suffer. Leaders who are really dedicated to the cause of an emancipated and liberated Africa have been systematically eliminated. And this could be seen in the demise of Patrice Lumumba at the hands of Moise Chombe, the disenfranchisement of Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, the fall of Commandant Thomas Isidore Sankara of Burkina Faso at the hands of Blaise Compaoré, Steve Biko, Solomon Kalush Mahlangu by the atrocious apartheid machinery, recently Colonel Gaddafi of Libya, and this also can be witnessed also in the world all over, like in the assassinations of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and many other leaders who would like to fight to see the men of color rising on that ontological ladder. So now Africa is left at the mercy of leaders who mimic the European way of life. Frantz Fanon clearly highlights this in one of his books titled Black Skin, White Masks. And Kwame Nkrumah coined it neo-colonialism. So this type of leaders, or this caliber of leaders, cannot be accountable to us, the common people of Africa, because they are not with us right from the beginning. Though they might be living in our geographical spaces and localities, they are never with the people. They are not with the people. In essence, their living experiences are of a pan-European picnic. Yes. Another issue that Africa is facing is the travesties of a sellout class, the so-called middle class. Instead of uplifting the lower class, they anticipate to be the upper class at the expense of the lower marginalized masses. They are nothing but bandits and askaris. They have adulterated the revolutionary language. You find where we used to talk about landlessness, they talk of bonds and home loans. Where we used to talk about poverty, they now talk of lifestyles. Now, this seems like they want to insinuate that the common man, the common African, is in his current state because of his lack of prudence. That the suffering African masses is in such a predicament because of lack of thriftness. Yet they do not want to agree and admit of the violent assassination by the capitalist machinery. And they will really want to look down upon their fellow Africans. So this class of spineless, blood-sucking maggots have no will to fight the colonial system, but to prop it up like the Black brothers who helped the slavers during the transatlantic slave trade. What we cannot see, or we might see but turn a blind eye to, is that the colonial system or the capitalistic system is in a state of continuous motion. It's ever moving. It's always migrating, reinventing, and rejuvenating itself. Initially, it started as a violent takeover of our political and economic spaces. It took over our government systems in Africa. Then there was the wars of liberation, in which most African countries gained their independence. Then it morphed into a second empire, which we might call the financial empire, which controls the markets. We call it free trade, as if it is free, and all other modes of business and economic sustenance. It has now migrated to a third empire and a more vicious one. This third empire, we can call it the metaphysical, or it can be called the cognitive and epistemic empire. In this mode, the capitalist agenda seeks to control what we think, how we think, and especially what we are not thinking of. This violent paradigm is responsible for the violent and heinous crimes like epistemicides, theft of people's identity and history, and also cultural imperialism. This is an invasion of the mental universe of the colonized people. Steve Biko reiterates this position by saying that the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So right now, I think Africa needs a revolution of epic proportions to deter global and imperial designs. As I'll call them global, but I believe the capitalistic designs are really what you can say they are planetary, because you can actually see it from one man's wish to try and rule from the Cape to the Cairo, Sissyton routes. He wanted to put all that land mass under his thumb. So these designs and desires are still at the heart of the capitalist wicked machinery. The real wish and aim and goal of the capitalist agenda is to own the whole planet. So this planetary invasion cannot be fought on a national level, where individual countries will want to fight down the capitalistic machinery. We need to mobilize as a continent so that we can dismantle this planetary political structure. We must have confidence in our homegrown and African brewed policies. As Marcus Garvey said, if you don't have confidence, you are twice defeated in the race of life. But if you have confidence, you have won before you have begun. So this year's commemoration to me with all that these devastations that are happening on the continent, I would like to invoke and call upon the spirit of the founding fathers of our OAU. Ask them, interrogate them, and say, is this the Africa that you wanted? Is this the Africa that you gave arm and limb for? Is this the Africa that you died for? Can we as Africa arise and rewrite our own history? Rewrite this colonial history from the point of its uninvited arrival. Writing our history from Africa for Africans. Thank you.